Today is Thursday, March 18th. We're talking about the latest developments in one of the worst mass killings in the last couple years, what may have compelled the gunman, and why it's left the Asian American community especially rattled. Also, a large new study about how likely it is you'll get COVID-19 twice, and the first high-level meetings between the U.S. and China that are bound to get heated. Plus, a tax extension you didn't have to ask for, airless bike tires that will never puncture, and explaining how this year's March Madness will be different than usual. Welcome to The Newsworthy. All the day's news in around 10 minutes. Fast, fair, fun, and on the go. I'm Erica Mandy. Thanks so much for being here. You ready? Let's do this. We start today with a shooting spree that sparked more outrage and fear in the Asian American community. A white gunman was charged with killing 8 people at 3 spas in the Atlanta area, including 6 Asian women. And this happened against a backdrop of discrimination and violence against Asian Americans that's been going up over the last year. A 21-year-old man was arrested for this most recent mass killing. The man's parents apparently recognized him from surveillance footage and helped investigators track him down. The suspect confessed, but told police the attacks were not racially motivated. Instead, he claims he has a sex addiction, and authorities say he apparently lashed out at businesses that tempted him. They say it's too soon to know if he'll be charged with a hate crime. Well, Atlanta's mayor says no matter what the shooter's motivation was, the quote, "It's unacceptable, it's hateful, and it has to stop." President Biden tweeted about this as well yesterday, saying he understands the Asian American community is in an enormous amount of pain. He continued saying, quote, "The recent attacks against the community are un-American. They must stop." An anti-hate group that tracks incidents against Asian Americans has received thousands of abuse reports over the past year. As for a reason, well, the new coronavirus was first identified in China, and some of the nation's leaders have blamed China for letting it grow out of control. So many believe fears about that have led to unfounded discrimination and violence here in the U.S. Now, in the aftermath of this week's attacks, officials in cities like New York and Seattle say they're adding more law enforcement patrols in Asian American communities. And the FBI is assisting local authorities in Georgia to investigate this latest shooting spree. The suspect is expected in court this morning. There's a new government warning about the rising threat of militias and white supremacists in the U.S. The new intelligence report first defined the difference between those two. It says extremists motivated by race, like white supremacists, are most likely to kill civilians. But militias typically target law enforcement, government personnel, and facilities. And then there are lone offenders. The intelligence report says they're actually the most likely to carry out violent attacks. Of course, this echoes some of what we've heard before from the FBI and others. And now this new intelligence says the threat is likely to stay high for at least the next few months. The public only gets to see a summary of this report, but Congress and the White House are going over the full classified version, and it could inspire new policies. Already, there seems to be some bipartisan support for giving the FBI more funding for agents and other resources to fight these threats. But that has not been approved just yet. Stay tuned. Today, the U.S. and China are holding the first high-level face-to-face meeting since President Biden took office. And things are expected to get pretty tense between the world's 2 largest economies. American officials like National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and Secretary of State Antony Blinken say they're planning to confront their Chinese counterparts. They'll say China needs to deal with a range of security and human rights issues before the U.S. and China can get along better. Remember, the U.S. has officially said China is committing genocide against Uyghur Muslims. And there are also issues of Hong Kong democracy, trade, cybersecurity, and climate change that will likely come up in the conversation as well. So far, Chinese leaders have seemed open to the talks. They say they're hoping to reset the U.S.-China relationship and respect each other as the world's leading powers. But one senior U.S. official told Reuters this will not be just an easy chat between government leaders, that the U.S. will be looking at, quote, deeds, not words. The talks are happening over the next 2 days in Anchorage, Alaska. If you've had COVID-19 in the last few months, it's looking pretty rare you'll get a serious case anytime soon. A new large study out of Denmark found most people who have had COVID-19 seem to have protection for at least 6 months. And those who do get sick again are usually 65 and older. Researchers followed about 4 million people over the course of 9 months last year. 11,000 of them ended up getting COVID-19 during the first wave of the pandemic in the spring. Then, less than 1% of those tested positive again during the second wave at the end of 2020. And again, most of those who did test positive were senior citizens. Scientists say the takeaway from this study is that older people should get vaccinated whether they've had COVID-19 already or not. There's one more thing we should mention. Even though this study was published this week, it was actually completed at the end of December. So now there are new COVID-19 strains that could make it more likely that someone would get reinfected. But more research is needed. All right, we have much more news still ahead, but first, this episode of The Newsworthy is presented by America's leading beverage companies who are working together to reduce plastic waste in our environment. Not all plastic is the same. America's beverage companies are carefully designing 100% recyclable plastic bottles, including the caps. Their bottles are made to be remade, and they're investing in community recycling programs to help get more bottles back so they can be turned into material used to make new bottles. That completes the circle and reduces plastic waste. Please help get every bottle back. Learn more at everybottleback.org. Again, that's everybottleback.org. Now back to the news. Americans now have a little more time to file and pay their federal income taxes. The IRS pushed the deadline back to May 17th, and that's, of course, about a month later than the usual April 15th cutoff. The delay comes as the IRS is now working to send another round of relief payments to Americans while also processing tax returns and refunds. And the Washington Post points out the IRS is already dealing with a backlog from the 2019 tax year. Plus, the latest coronavirus relief bill also made a number of changes to the law that could impact some Americans' returns for 2020. So the hope is this deadline delay will help the IRS and Americans get caught up. But keep in mind, this is just for your federal taxes. While most states will likely adjust their deadlines too, it's not a guarantee. So you'll want to check when you need to file and pay those state taxes as well. The demand for gasoline may never recover from the pandemic. At least that's what a new report from the watchdog International Energy Agency says. As we've mentioned before, gas usage has tanked in the last year, mostly because people are working from home and many cities around the world have largely shut down. But even when things get back to normal, gas usage may stay low. The agency says there's a few reasons for this. There's a growing shift to electric vehicles, manufacturers are improving fuel efficiency, and the work-from-home model is likely here to stay for a lot of major companies. On top of all of that, airlines have been using less as well. The report predicts the jet fuel demand probably will not get back to 2019 levels before the year 2024, even though air travel has been rising lately. For the first time, scientists have grown embryos in a mechanical womb. Researchers took embryos from mice and placed them in an artificial uterus. It was made up of incubators, nutrients, and a ventilation system, which apparently allowed the embryos to thrive. They developed limbs, a heart, and circulatory and nervous systems, which researchers say is remarkable. As the New York Times reports, until now, biologists believed a fetus could only develop in a mother's living womb. But they've now been able to grow more than 1,000 mouse embryos in an artificial one. This kind of research may give scientists new insight into how mammals develop. For example, it may help them better understand why miscarriages happen and how certain nutrients and environmental factors might affect a fetus. And the work might eventually extend beyond mice. That said, scientists say they're years away from creating human embryos this way, and it's not clear if they'll even be allowed to do that. To be continued. How would you like to get around on Airless bike tires? A new startup company just debuted the new type of tire that could have you saying goodbye to pumps and punctures. Instead, these Airless bike tires use interconnected springs that don't inflate. It's based on NASA technology developed for rover missions to the moon and Mars. In fact, the company called Smart is part of a NASA startup program that hopes to use innovations for space to improve life back on Earth. The new type of airless bike tire is set to become available to the public early next year, and then the company hopes to bring the same type of tech to cars and trucks as well. The numbers are in, and for the 30th year in a row, Labrador Retrievers are the most popular dog breed in the U.S. This is based on data from the American Kennel Club. It basically tallies the number of purebreds registered, and it then breaks them down by breed. Although Labs reigned supreme last year, there was one big shakeup on the list. French Bulldogs overtook German Shepherds as America's second most popular dog breed. Frenchies have been rising in popularity for years now. They have wrinkly little faces and perky ears, which make them pretty cute. They've gotten a lot of exposure, too, since celebrities like Lady Gaga, Reese Witherspoon, Hugh Jackman, and Chrissy Teigen have all adopted this type of breed. TBD if Frenchies ever make it to the #1 spot, though. As of now, Labs have them beat by a landslide. Other breeds that made the top 10 last year include Golden Retrievers, Bulldogs, Poodles, Beagles, Rottweilers, and more. And that's it for the main news today, but now it's time for Thing to Know Thursday. And today's Thing to Know is all about March Madness, which kicks off today. But first, thanks to our sponsor, Fitbod. I don't know about you, but if I go more than a couple days without getting some type of workout in, it affects me, both mentally and physically. I really need to move my body to feel good. And Fitbod is able to help build the momentum needed. I love how Fitbod makes it easy to work out anywhere, and I can pick workouts specifically tailored to the equipment or lack of equipment that I have at the time. So I've continued to work out at home a lot these days, and that's not a problem with Fitbod. It has body weight routines, or I can just let it know I have a few weights and a band, and it'll give me exercises for that. Whether it's no equipment or an entire gym, Fitbod will build a workout program for you, and then even use the algorithm and analytics to make sure your next workout is even better than the last one. So build the momentum to carry your fitness journey through the rest of the year with Fitbod. Get 25% off a membership when you sign up now at fitbod.me/newsworthy. That's 25% off your membership at fitbod.me/newsworthy. Okay, now back to Thing to Know Thursday. This year's NCAA men's basketball tournament, better known as March Madness, is going to be unlike any other. And you can probably guess why. COVID-19. The whole tournament is happening around Indianapolis, so players do not have to travel from city to city like they usually do. And that means the whole bracket looks different this year. Normally, it's broken up into 4 regions based on geography. And in the early rounds, the best teams play close to home. Well, this year, the bracket is based on what's called an S-curve. It basically means the top-ranked teams face off against the lowest-ranked teams in the first round, no matter where they're from. Also, for the first time, 4 teams that did not quite make the cut are basically understudies. They'll step in case any other team gets hit with a COVID outbreak and doesn't have enough players to compete. So no matter what, there should be a lot of basketball to watch over the next 2.5 weeks. And of course, the women's NCAA basketball tournament starts this weekend. That's happening in the Texas cities of San Antonio, Austin, and San Marcos. All right, thank you so much for listening and for always telling your friends, family, and coworkers about the Newsworthy. We'll be back tomorrow with much more news to know. Until then, have a great day.